Hello everybody, welcome to week one of Ethics and Society. For this first week we're actually going to have two of these lecture videos. The rest of the course for the other 3 weeks we'll just have one lecture video. But we have a little additional content in the first week, some introductory stuff, and so I'm going to break it into two separate videos. I also want to emphasize that the exams for the course will come from both the readings and these lecture videos. So it's imperative that you do both. Obviously do the readings for the course, and the readings are fairly simple and short, and they won't be too time consuming for you, but also take the time to watch the lecture videos, because I will have some content that I'll add in the lecture videos that won't come directly from the readings. And these PowerPoints that I'm presenting to you during these lecture videos, they'll also be available in the course resources section, so you can view them separately from the lecture videos. Okay, so what I want to do in this first video for week one is try to understand generally the nature of the philosophical enterprise. In other words, I want to try to answer the question, what is philosophy? Now that's a complex question. It's not an easy thing to answer, but I think we can at least get a basic idea of the nature of philosophy in a fairly brief discussion. So this first lecture video, we're going to try to address the question, what is philosophy, and how does philosophical ethics fit into the larger picture of philosophy? Since we're going to be spending the rest of the course on philosophical ethics, I think it's important that we understand where ethics actually fits in the big picture of philosophy. Now, there are a number of ways we could do this. I could start by defining the word philosophy, the way the word has been used historically. So historically, or etymologically, that's the fancy word for the history of a word. The word philosophy comes from two Greek words, philo and sophia. Philo means love, Sophia means wisdom, and so etymologically the word philosophy literally means love of wisdom. But that's not a particularly enlightening way of defining philosophy. It doesn't really enumerate or articulate in any clear way what philosophers do or what kind of problems they're dealing with in their everyday activities. So what I propose we do here is look at the way philosophers have divided their philosophical discourse into four areas historically. In other words, philosophers, like all people in academia, categorize their problems into different areas of study, and so philosophers have settled on basically four different areas. And so what I want to do over the course of this lecture is look at those four different areas of philosophical study, give them a basic definition as we go through them, and look at some of the typical problems that philosophers try to address in those different areas. And we're not going to get into any really heavy technical discussion. I'm just going to sort of touch on the surface issues here just to give us a general picture of what these areas of study are all about, and how they relate to one another, and eventually how it all ties to our project, philosophical ethics. Okay, so we're going to start with metaphysics. Now, metaphysics is first for no particular reason. It's not like it's the foundational area of study in philosophy, or the most important or the most sophisticated. I just picked metaphysics because the kinds of problems that metaphysicians deal with are the kinds of problems that many people think of when they think about philosophy. So we'll start there, and then we'll work our way through these other categories as we go along. Okay, so let's first define metaphysics. Metaphysics is the branch of philosophy concerned with fundamental questions about the nature of existence. So any question you can ask on a bottom basement level, that's a fundamental level, about what exists out there in reality, and what the nature of those things are, those would qualify as metaphysical questions. So philosophers working in this area are tackling some of the most challenging and difficult questions that humanity has ever considered. So let's just make it pretty clear here. Two examples of the kinds of questions that philosophers are trying to answer when they're doing metaphysics would be what kinds of things exist in reality on a fundamental level, and two, what is the nature of those things that exist on the fundamental level. Now, we need to talk about what fundamental level means, because there are other disciplines in the academic world that do talk about the nature of reality on some pretty basic levels. Physics, chemistry, the natural sciences in general. So a physicist, for example, might be concerned with answering the question of how many subatomic particles exist in reality. And so if they were to answer that question, they would have told us something on a pretty fundamental level about the nature of the universe and the nature of reality in general. But they're not at the very bottom basement level when they're answering questions like how many subatomic particles exist in reality. Because there are further questions we could ask about those particles that would move us into the realm of philosophical discussion. Why are there particles at all? In other words, why is there something as opposed to nothing? Do the particles have purpose? Do they have a reason why they're here and they are the way they are? So if you're exploring questions of that nature, you move below the level of physics and you're talking about something even more fundamental than the truths of empirical science. So those are the kind of questions that we're concerned with when we're dealing with metaphysics. So here are some archetypal examples of metaphysical questions. And these are questions that have been contemplated throughout the history of philosophy, many hundreds of years, some of these a couple thousand years actually. These questions have been in play in philosophical discourse. So number one, this is the paradigm example of a metaphysical question: does God exist? If we were to answer that question philosophically, then we would know something on a fundamental level about what exists out there in reality. And then we could ask questions about the nature of that divine being. We could ask questions about its actions in reality. Those would all qualify as metaphysical questions. That question, does God exist, won't be something we'll address directly, but we will look at the question of the nature of religiously based ethics. So this question is obviously tangentially related to some of our concerns. In other words, if we say that God is responsible for the nature of morality, it would be important to understand God's nature and to demonstrate the existence of such a being if we're going to predicate or base our ethical system on the utterances or commands of that being. So in week 2, we'll take a look at the relationship between religion and ethics. And so, like I said, these metaphysical issues will play some role in our discussions. Another typical question within metaphysics is the question of whether or not we have free will. To put that in a more precise way, do we have the ability to do otherwise? Can we choose our course of action in the future? Obviously, we have some constraints. We can't just choose to do anything we want to. We're limited by resources and physical laws and things of that nature. But within those boundaries, do we have the ability to freely choose? And so this has been an issue in the history of philosophy that's been hotly debated, and it's directly related to our concern here in the study of philosophical ethics, because many philosophers agree that if we don't have meaningful free will, then our ethical claims don't seem to have the kind of value that we think they have. Just to put it in a simple way, if I can't freely choose my future, then I can't really be responsible for my actions. So if I were to murder somebody or steal somebody's property, it wouldn't be because I'm responsible for that. I would relinquish responsibility because I lack the freedom necessary to be accountable for that behavior. So some philosophers have argued historically that we are just a result of the initial conditions of the universe and the laws of nature, and the universe is unfolding like a large machine. It's complex, it's difficult to understand and predict what will happen next, but nevertheless it's a large machine that functions in a deterministic way. So what we'll do for this course is we're not going to solve this free will issue. That would be a course in and of itself. So we're going to assume that we have the ability to freely choose our future in a way that's significant enough for ethics to be meaningful. And then we'll look at the nature of ethics based on that assumption. Another question that philosophers might explore in metaphysics is what is the nature of mental phenomena? To put it in a more straightforward way, what are mental states? We have various mental states like pain and pleasure and anger and euphoria and so forth. What exactly are those things? Are they physical things? Are they non-physical things? If they're physical things, then in what kinds of physical systems do they arise? They seem to arise obviously in my brain, but do they arise in other physical systems like cats and dogs and rocks and things like that? And then if they're non-physical, if mental phenomena are non-physical, then how do we have proof that they exist, and how do they interact with the physical world if they're non-physical entities? So questions of that nature would fall into an area of study called the philosophy of mind. And so it won't be something we're going to spend any time on in this course. We're going to assume that we have free will and that we have significant enough internal mental life to make meaningful claims about the nature of morality. And then finally, one other question that might be discussed by metaphysicians is the nature of personal identity. So this question has a direct relationship with ethics. The issue here is, how do we identify a person across time? So, for example, you remember being in the third grade, and now you're in a career, or you're a college student and so forth, and you believe that that entire time from where you are now running backwards to the third grade, you retained your identity. You were the same person. Now, obviously, you've changed physically and you've changed psychologically. Most people believe that they've retained their personhood across time. But it's a fair question philosophically. What is it that determines the retention of our personhood across time? Is it a physical component of us? Is it a non-physical component of us? And depending on how we answer that question can have deep implications for our moral theories. Just to give a simple example, we incarcerate people for very long periods of time in our culture. And so if somebody's put into prison, say, for 30 years, we're assuming that over that 30-year period, they are the same person through that incarceration. But if they lost their identity, or had no identity in the first place to retain, then it might be arguable that we shouldn't have such long periods of incarceration. In fact, it could be considered morally wrong to incarcerate somebody for that a long period of time if they don't retain personhood. So, what that really boils down to is the application of our moral theories. If we decide on a given moral theory and then we try to apply it to the state affairs in the world, one of those state of affairs would be trying to figure out whether or not we are the kinds of things that retain our identity over time. So those are not the only questions in metaphysics, but those are good examples of the kinds of problems that metaphysicians would consider. And you see that with each of them, if we were to find an answer, we would know something on a fundamental level about the nature of reality, and we would know something on a qualitative level about those fundamental claims. We would know not just certain entities exist, but what those things are like out there in reality. Okay, so let's move from metaphysics to epistemology. So epistemology is the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature of knowledge. So any question we can ask on a philosophical level about knowledge is fair game here. So some common questions in epistemology would be questions like, what is knowledge? Historically, there has been this 2,000-year-old quest in philosophy to define knowledge adequately. Plato sort of started this discussion, and that was over 2,000 years ago. And he defines knowledge as true justified belief. And that's a fairly simple definition to understand. What Plato means is that in order to have knowledge, one has to form a belief. The belief has to be true. It can't be a false belief and qualify as knowledge. But the belief also has to have justification. It has to have something to back it up, because otherwise it could just be a guess or something. It could be a belief that was just true by accident. So Plato believes that once you have a belief that's true and has adequate justification, then you can claim that you have knowledge. And so philosophers have argued over the plausibility of that definition for the last 2 millennia. And even to this day, there's no clear agreement on whether Plato is successful. He's certainly not completely successful, because there are many counterexamples to his definition of knowledge, and that goes beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here in this ethics class, but it is frustrating to the other areas of philosophical study that epistemologists have not been able to adequately give an adequate definition of knowledge. Another question that epistemologists might try to answer here is whether or not knowledge is possible. So if we've defined knowledge, then we can start asking questions about whether we can actually have it. And there's a group of philosophers called the skeptics who believe that knowledge just is not possible. And there's a number of reasons why they hold that to be the case. Some of them will argue that the way we acquire knowledge is unreliable. For example, many of our knowledge claims about the world come from our senses. We know something from seeing it, smelling it, tasting it, feeling it, and our senses are notoriously unreliable, and so their argument is that you can't base knowledge claim on unreliable sources. Other philosophers think that our knowledge is ultimately based on rational processes. The senses only play a secondary role, and so the skeptic once again says, well, our reasoning processes are fallible. They can't be trusted 100%, and so they can't provide us with knowledge. So there's a healthy debate in the history of philosophy about whether knowledge is something that's even possible, or do we have to just accept that the best we can do is have reliable beliefs, but they may not go to the level of qualifying as knowledge. And then finally, a third question that epistemologists might consider would be the question of how do we acquire knowledge? So, talking about the previous question gave us some clues on how philosophers might try to answer this question. There's one group who says the primary source of knowledge is experience. There's another group who says the primary source of knowledge is reason. And depending on the way you go with that, you end up with different epistemological approaches in many, many different arenas. In the contemporary world, it seems that the group who holds that experience is the primary source for knowledge has won out because we rely so heavily on the sciences, but the other group who says reason is primary, they would point to disciplines like mathematics and computer science maybe as examples of where you have purely reason-based claims. Now, for our purposes, this question of how we acquire knowledge is somewhat important because we're going to be looking at claims about the nature of philosophical ethics, and a number of philosophers will claim to have knowledge of those truths. And so it'd be a fair question of how can one have knowledge of moral truths, which shows the overlap between epistemology and ethics. Okay, so that gives us a general idea of what epistemologists are doing and how it's tangentially related to our concerns in studying philosophical ethics. So let's move on to our next area of study, which is logic. So logic is the branch of philosophy concerned with the evaluation of arguments. Arguments are the mechanism that powers the entire philosophical enterprise. Philosophers have lots of things that they claim to be true, but they won't accept those truths unless they have reasons for those truths. In other words, in philosophy, one can only hold beliefs if they have evidence for those beliefs. So now there can be debates about what qualifies as adequate evidence, but philosophers are generally in agreement about the requirement for some measure of evidence for our beliefs and our beliefs. And so what logic does is it explores the nature of arguments. So since arguments are the mechanism that philosophers use to try to discover the truth, it's important for philosophers to understand the different ways that arguments might be presented, the different ways that arguments might succeed and fail, and logic is obligated to the study of those sorts of questions. So common topics that might be explored in a logic course would be questions like the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is the kind of reasoning we would generally use in something like mathematics, where you have clear, definitive steps that lead to an unquestionable proof for a conclusion. And inductive reasoning is the kind of reasoning we would typically use in the scientific arena, where what you're essentially doing is looking for patterns in nature. And so there are very different ways of producing arguments, but nevertheless they're both important for us in different areas of inquiry. So it's important for philosophers to understand the difference between those types of arguments and the reasoning that leads to them, and also how those types of arguments, deductive and inductive, could succeed and fail. So that leads us to our second topic explored in logic, common issue explored at least, which is the types of logical fallacies that are out there. Logical fallacies are just defects in arguments, and philosophers have spent many centuries cataloging common errors in arguments. The idea being that if you have a comprehensive catalog of the way that arguments can go poorly, and then you can learn those different ways that arguments fail and be more aware of when you or someone else is using fallacious reasoning. Another area that philosophers explore in great detail under the category of logic is the nature of validity. Validity is a concept that applies to deductive arguments. It's really a measure of the quality of a deductive argument, and so much of philosophical logic is obligated to understanding when deductive arguments are valid or invalid. Valid would be the ones that actually have the appropriate structure to support the claim in the argument, whereas invalid deductive arguments would be the kind of arguments that would not have the appropriate structure. And so in a logic course, you would explore in great detail the different ways of assessing validity in deductive reasoning, and the different techniques and algorithms for understanding whether an argument is acceptable or not within those boundaries. So, of course, we're going to be using logic throughout the course, but we're not going to be looking at it in the formal sense as if this were a logic class. I'll be presenting various arguments for positions in philosophical ethics, and we'll have to understand the basic logical structure of those arguments, and when they do commit various fallacies, we'll explore that as we come to those issues. Okay, so that leaves us with one final area of philosophical study, which is axiology. It's also referred to as value theory. And this area of study is concerned with philosophical questions pertaining to value. So philosophers explore a number of different types of value under this heading of axiology. Some examples would be aesthetic value, which relates to the nature of judgments of beauty, political value, which relates to questions about the appropriate form of government, and then, of course, what we'll be concerned with in this class, ethical values, the nature of right and wrong. So here are some common questions that we might try to address in axiology, and some I've already sort of mentioned, but one question would be, what is art? This would fall under the area of aesthetics. When do you have a work of art? When do you not have a work of art? And then related to that, what is the nature of beauty? When do you have a good work of art, and when do you have a poor work of art? When is something deemed beautiful, and what makes it beautiful? Those would be all questions that would fall under the category of study called aesthetics. But we're talking about aesthetic value, and so they would fall under axiology. Also, what is the best form of government? Is it a democracy? Is it a timocracy where honor is the highest value? In a democracy, the collective determines the course of action in that society. But in a timocracy, those who are most honored would, or it could be a meritocracy, where the people who have earned a particular position based on some accomplishment make the decisions in society. Or should government be a form of all of those things? Should resources be distributed evenly throughout society? That would be a question that would fall under social political philosophy. So there are a number of questions that in that area of study overlap quite significantly with what we're concerned with here, philosophical ethics. And finally, our project, what is the nature of right and wrong? That would be a question that would fall clearly under ethical value and the nature of ethical theory. So while we'll be working in axiology the entire semester, our main concern is going to be the nature of ethical claims, and so these other issues like the appropriate form of government and the nature of beauty will only come up tangentially, if at all. And so that leaves us with what we're going to be talking about the next 4 weeks: ethics. So let's have a proper definition of it here. Ethics is the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature of right and wrong. So common questions in ethics, and these all of these questions we'll explore over the next 4 weeks. Are questions like, are the standards of right and wrong created by society? That's going to be the topic we try to conquer in our next lecture video. This is a position called ethical relativism. The idea is that the society or individuals just create moral truth. Moral truths don't exist until we come along and make them up. And we're going to look at that view and see if it can be defended or defeated philosophically. Another question that is going to come up in our explorations is the relationship between religion and morality. Is religion important for morality, or is it irrelevant? Does it make sense to think of ethics as a result of the claims or commands of a divine being? And so we'll look at that in week 2 when we take a look at divine command theory and a position called natural law theory, both of which rely on a relationship between ethics and our moral claims. And then finally, the question of what is the best ethical theory. Philosophers historically have offered many different theories of ethics, and they've all been defended and criticized in various ways, and so we're going to look at some of those theories and look at the defense of them and the critical analysis of them and see if we can come to some conclusions about whether some are better than others. Okay, so that puts us in the direction of where we're going to head for the next 4 weeks. And so I would ask that you be diligent about looking at these videos and doing the readings. And if you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to contact me, and we can address those issues as they come along. The course won't be, I don't think, too difficult for you to do well in if you just watch the videos and take the reading seriously and allot time each week to work through what I've asked you to do. It shouldn't be a challenge at all for you to make a really good grade in the course. All right, so that's it for this lecture, and I'll see you on the next one.